Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Mary Hickey, and I am the Colorado Humanities and Center for the Book Programs Coordinator. I'd like to thank Pikes Peak Library District for providing great venues for the 32nd Annual Colorado Book Awards finalist readings. Thank you also to our sponsors, Unite for Literacy and the Colorado Sun. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to 4 talented writers whose books have been named by Colorado Book Awards selectors as finalists in the anthology and literary fiction categories. Unfortunately, none of the poetry finalists could make it today. Copies of all the finalists' books are available for purchase and online through Poor Richard's Books and Gifts, and Jeffrey Payne is representing Poor Richard's at the table back there. Poor Richard's is the 2023 Colorado Book Awards official bookseller this year. Please do ask finalists to sign your books. There will be time to ask questions with each author after their reading, and please do ask questions. Our first reader today is Jennie MacDonald, who is a contributing writer of the anthology Bizarre Bazaar, a collection of stories from Rocky Mountain fiction writers. Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers is a nonprofit, volunteer-run organization dedicated to supporting, encouraging, and educating writers seeking publication in fiction. Jennie.
I'm reading from my short story, The Emperor's New Shoes. A young pigeon pecking the ground near the feet of a small boy heard it first. "But he has nothing on at all," the boy exclaimed. The pigeon looked up at the approaching procession, saw the emperor, and saw what the boy had said was true. The boy was shushed and whisked away, scuffing his brass-buttoned shoes to delay leaving as long as possible. The pigeon flew into the trees to tell her friends. A passing dove could hardly believe her ears and mentioned it to a robin, who told a bluebird, who told a cardinal, who thought it a good joke and shared it out among the chickadees, finches, and swallows. And then the tale was in the wind, spiraling down into the villages and towns, rattling newspaper printing presses into action, and brushing past the ears of people who lived too far away to attend the procession and hadn't been invited anyway. Someone giggled, someone else joined in. A collective chuckle became a chortle, a guffaw. It grew to a belly laugh in the far reaches of the empire. Over the following days, a chorus of laughter crept, then rolled, then surged across the land toward the palace. In the broad avenue before the ancient gates, the laughter skirted carriages and coaches and caught at the brass button of a boot worn by a small boy, who shook it off and ran to catch up with his friends. The laughter curled up next to the curb where lords and ladies alighted from their conveyances. Eventually, someone would let it in. The emperor couldn't remain holed up forever, could he? A tradeswoman carrying a banner emblazoned with 2 shoes stepped over the laughter and presented her card at the gate. "What kind of trade has she?" asked a young page, watching her pass into the foyer. "Shoemaking, of course," replied the silver polisher. "Shoemakers must have everything in pairs." "My old dad has just 1 leg," said the page. "What would he do with a second shoe?" "Give it to an old dad with 1 leg who wears his shoe on the other foot, of course." The shoemaker had an answer for everything. The shoemaker was shown to the emperor's dressing room, which had once been a ballroom. But as the emperor had so many clothes and the palace several ballrooms, he had ordered this one fitted up to serve his greatest pleasure, displaying his lovely wardrobe of mannequins with his on an army of mannequins and sharing this breathtaking sight with specially invited guests. In one niche slept a baby mannequin dressed in an exquisite lace gown and bonnet knitted by the emperor's grandmother. In another, a tiny boy mannequin wore velvet breeches and jacket for riding his mannequin pony. It was this charming suit and brocade cap festooned with one long peacock feather that had turned the young emperor's head to the delights of clothing. The acquisition of every other article of apparel in this vast hall, every cloak, cape, coat, blouse, shirt, vest, tie, cravat, tunic, sash, belt, trousers, robe, turban, helmet, uniform, dressing gown, and pajamas, had each been part of his unspoken quest to discover once again the rapture of that very first ensemble and the intoxicating response to it that fed his pride. As days passed, he could be found slumped in his gold-leaf chair at the center of the room and sighing one heavy sigh after another. Newspapers lay scattered about his feet, the staff having stripped them of front pages that continued to carry headlines like "Emperor's Nude Clothes." And man finally cured of hiccups caused by laughing that day. Boy Speaks Up Where Adults Fear to Tread featured an interview with said child whose biggest regret was missing the sweets thrown by the emperor's retinue to distract the crowd. His mother's biggest regret was the child's tantrum thrown at her tea party the same afternoon. "My carpet will never be the same," she lamented, but the emperor just couldn't help pulling the front pages out of the recycling bins when no one was looking. With such news, and the fact that no one could take his calls without bursting into laughter, the emperor had fallen into a deep depression. The two swindlers who had taken advantage of his love for beautiful clothes had fled, but not even the thought of pursuing and apprehending them made him feel any better. His wardrobe no longer pleased him. Since that day, he had gone through the habit of dressing in his clothes, but without the pleasure that once attended this sartorial event. Within weeks, he'd stooped to throwing together his daily outfit without any assistance at all. No one said a word when he shrugged on an old cardigan over his fine silk waistcoat and buttoned on his sailor's trousers. Waving away a proffered breakfast tray, usually he tucked into the most important meal of the day with early morning enthusiasm. He wondered if he should just go back to bed. But then he remembered commanding his counselors to find him a new source of amusement. "Your shoes, sir, have never disappointed," his good old minister observed. The emperor regarded his tall black shoes with silver buckles. "That's true. Even on the worst, that very worst of days, they bore me through to the end of the street. I shall have a new pair, the best in the land." His good old minister hastened to the office of imperial decrees. A notice to all shoemakers was composed, printed, and dispatched throughout the land. Days passed, the staff grew anxious, the emperor could be found despondently feeding pigeons in the garden. Only one shoemaker responded to the imperial decree. The rest were all still laughing and feared they couldn't keep their faces straight during an interview. At last, the shoemaker bowed before the emperor. "Your Imperial Majesty, I have brought you the finest shoes in all the land," she said. With a flourish, she lifted the lid from a simple wooden box. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you tell me about the process of getting your story into that anthology? How did that go?
Oh my goodness. When Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers put out their call for submissions, I had to think a lot about the stories that I had. But at the time, there wasn't a title for the anthology, so it was going to be named after all the stories came together. So who knew what the theme was going to be? But the theme actually, as it was listed, was renewal, and this was during COVID. So people were looking for a sense of going forward with new purpose. So I thought about the stories that I had, and this was the one that kept cycling into my head. So I sent it in, and I can't recall how much time passed, but I happily received a notice of acceptance. And what I especially enjoyed was working with the editors during the preparation of the whole manuscript, because they did give me feedback that I found very valuable. This story, like most stories, has been through many revisions, and I have to say that without the feedback I had from the editors, it wouldn't be the story that I'm the most happy with at this time. So thank you. And then when the book came out, I was so happy to receive that in the mail. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Did any of the editing suggestions have to do with the way the words appeared on the page?
Actually, no, that's something I have a great deal of interest in, because I've done typesetting and layout and all of that myself, but I didn't actually have anything to do with that. Everything was put together and someone else did all of that hard part.
That's sometimes
Yeah.
hard to accept, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Sometimes you feel, I mean, it's shoving your child out into the world and saying, dress however you want, you know, or not, or not. Oh, yes. Yeah, but I must say I do love how the book looks, and I especially love the typesetting. I was so pleased. Yeah, thank you.
Jenny, I'm just wondering, could you just say a little bit about if you're able to...
The book has a wonderful statement in the introduction about exactly that, and I should have brought it up here. But the title came about because they had such a wide variety of subject matter. There are science fiction stories. There are at least another story based on a folktale. There are stories about all different kinds of people finding new reasons to change or to pursue. I think the title Bizarre Bazaar, apart from being fun to say or challenging, encapsulates everything in the sense of a bazaar where you can be pulled one way or another depending on what catches your eye and what catches your fancy and what you're there to begin with. So I would say there's a wide variety, and also a wide variety of lengths of stories, and wonderful characters who I think can capture your heart. People going through hard times and people going through strange times. I hope that helps. I might just say that the next anthology call has been posted, and that anthology is around the theme Colorado's climate change. So all fiction, all stories, and that call has been open through June 15th. And the other thing I will say is that when I first wrote this story, it was for a different project, because I find that reading calls for submission is my best motivator to write, in part because it helps me focus on a story, rather than kind of thinking, oh, I'll do whatever comes to my mind about a tennis ball or something. Instead, that anthology was actually based on the Emperor's New Clothes. And bizarre as it may seem, this story didn't end up in it. But there was all kinds of confusion around that. And at the time, the illustrator of that collection did the art for this story, and she told me I could share it whenever I wanted. This has been my first opportunity, so I brought some postcard versions of this image that you could use for bookmarks if you like. They're with Betsy. But I thought it was so charming, and I'm so pleased to share this with the world, because for her, she also was never able to see this in public. So I'm very grateful to her. She was very generous. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next we have Cynthia Swanson, who is the editor of Denver Noir. Cynthia writes literary suspense, often using historical settings. Her debut novel, The Bookseller, was a New York Times bestseller, an Indie Next selection, and the winner of the 2016 Willa Literary Award for Historical Fiction. Cynthia lives in Denver. Cynthia.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Colorado Humanities, and thank all of you for being here. It's lovely to see you, and appreciate you being here. So, Denver Noir is the book that I'm going to be talking a little bit about. This came out last year, and it is part of a series of anthologies, noir titled series, from a publisher in Brooklyn called Akashic Books. And Akashic has been publishing this series since 2004, I believe. And there are, you can't really see them, but I'll show you. There are about 120 of these, and they're set in cities all over the country and all over the world. So there's, Washington, D.C., and there's a Paris, and there's a Seattle, and a San Francisco, and Beirut. I mean, they're just they're everywhere. So it's a really amazing collection, and I highly encourage you to check it out. It's really fun to read about places that you know or places that you want to know through this series. And the stories are all kind of dark, morally ambiguous tales, and they're all written by local authors local to that area. So a few years ago, they realized they did not have a Denver. I think they'd known it for a while, but they really realized that it was kind of a big hole in their collection, that they were missing Denver, because Denver is such a big literary community. So they were looking for an editor, and my name came up, and when that happened, I jumped at it, because who wouldn't want to do something like that? So I was really lucky to be able to edit this anthology. It has 14 stories in it by, most of the authors are Denver-based. Everybody's Colorado-based, I think, but most of them are Denver-based, and every story takes place. The other thing that's kind of interesting about these books is, again, very hard to see, but if you want to take a look at the book selling table later, each of these books in the collection have a map in the front pages, and it's a map of the city where it's set, and there's a little white dead body where each story is set. So so there's some kind of nice geographical spread of stories that are in different parts of the city. So I'm going to just read you the beginnings of a couple of them, give you sort of a little mini smorgasbord of this collection. I have a story in it, but there are also 13 other incredible authors, so I do want to share their work as well. So I'm just going to do a couple of them just to kind of give you guys a sense of what this is about. I'll start with mine, though. Mine is, the title of my story is Pieces of Everyone Everywhere, and it's set in Cheeseman Park, if you know that area at all. And I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs. Digging graves is straightforward labor involving little more than brute strength and a sufficiently sharp blade. The job can be done with relative ease by even the most doltish of common work hands. But here's something many do not know. Exhuming graves, by contrast, is art. One cannot simply thrust one's spade in the ground, hack around until one hits upon some solid object, then mercilessly subtract shovelful after shovelful of raw earth until the grave's remains, treasure-like, are exposed. Nor can one wrest such treasure from the ground, haphazardly tossing fragments to the surface and flinging them into any vessel conveniently nearby. No, such practices would be immoral. Moreover, they would, as my Uncle August said, invite misfortune. August believed, as do I, that regardless of circumstances, the dead deserve to lie peacefully. They should be disturbed only in the most dire of situations. If a body must be moved, it should be done properly and with reverence. There's no cause to uproot them, Sam, Uncle August told me. If you have to do it, you better have a damn good reason, and you better treat them with respect. So if you know anything about Cheeseman, you might kind of understand what's going on with that. Cheeseman Park was created by exhuming bodies from a graveyard. It was built on a what's now a desecrated graveyard in 1893, and that's when the story is set. And it goes through the viewpoint of that young gravedigger. And I'll let you read the story to find out more of what happens. The next one I'll read a little bit from is a story by Peter Heller. If you're familiar with him, he's been nominated for the Colorado Book Award and I think won a number of times. He's a wonderful, wonderful author there, very well known, and I was so pleased that he was willing to write a story for this collection. Peter's story is set in Sloan's Lake, and it's called The Lake. And I'm not going to read from the beginning. I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs that I really like. I love the whole story, but it's so atmospheric, and this is just kind of how it sounds all the way through. So that first morning of thick fog, I was alone at dawn, happily paddling blind. I felt disembodied in the mist, as if I were paddling through outer space with no real up or down, and the fog parted a little before me, and on the glass of dark water there was a sudden suffusion, a glow, and then I clearly saw a man reclined, bearded, under a bridge. The picture pulsed once and was replaced by a figure, the same man, striking a woman, until she buckled and fell. And then, like the shadow of a sudden cloud, the black water coalesced into a kind of cloak and blotted out the man. I must not have been breathing then. I was shocked that a life might end with the toss of a cloak, that it should end. The image on the water looked exactly like the homeless man who slept under the bridge at the East End. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. It's a very fun story. I'm not going to read this one because it's difficult to read, but I did want to point out that the collection includes a story told in graphic form by an amazing storyteller and artist named R. Ellen Brooks. So if you're into graphic art, it's really fun to have included one of those in the collection. So I hope that everybody will have a chance to check that out. The next little piece is a bit longer, and it's actually by Amy Drayer, who was one of the editors of Bizarre Bazaar, which we just heard from, and she also, I was fortunate to have her be a contributor to this collection. So I'd like to read a little bit from her story. She has a wonderful voice. I wish she was here to read it herself, but she's not, so I will read for her. It's called No Gods, and it's set on South Broadway, although this particular part of the story is set in Platt Park. Like I said, I walk home through Platt Park in autumn. This character is a librarian at the Sarah Decker Library, if you know Denver at all. Like I said, I walk home through Platt Park in autumn, sit under the falling leaves and have a lucky. Sunny days, the sharp, cool wind slips over your skin with a sweet little kiss. When it's cloudy and smells like Greeley, the wind is ominous. It's going to bring snow and cold and dark. Some cloudy day in late October, I'm doing my thing after work, thinking about what I'm going to put in the pan for dinner. Faven leaves the swing she's been sitting on, just kicking dirt, walks over and sits opposite me on the bench. Faven is a little girl, an 8-year-old girl that she's befriended at her library, who comes in to visit her library and has become the character Cheryl's friend. Hey Faven, how you doing today? Miss Cheryl, I have to apologize to you. Faven doesn't look at me. She's looking at the ground and fidgeting with the hem of her dress over the top of blown-out knees of her jeans. What in the world for, sweetheart? I promised to weave you a tree of life with the weed I grew. And you haven't? No. Honey, that's okay, but do you want to tell me why not? Now, don't think I'm an asshole. I wasn't asking to make it worse for her. Jesus, she seemed repentant enough. She still hadn't even looked at me. But she came over to talk, and when a girl like that gives you her time, it means something. Well, she replied, I wanted to, more hem-fraying. Did you get busy with school? No, I wanted to make it for you, but then I didn't want to anymore. Have I done something wrong, Faven? You ever disappoint a kid? Shit, for your sake, I hope not. No, ma'am. You just stopped wanting to make something for me, or make something at all? I don't really want to make stuff anymore, at all. She pulled the string of the hem long enough to fly a kite. Didn't seem at all worried that her mom might not be thrilled about it. Didn't seem to care about much at all, as far as I could tell. The light had gone out. I'd seen that happen to plenty of women, married women, who stayed married because what was the alternative? Never thought I'd have to see it with a young girl, but who was I fucking kidding? Did someone else do something wrong? I narrowed my eyes and stared hard at the top of her bent head. 4 symmetrical poops with twin blue balls on each of the ties held her sweet black hair tightly in place. Perfect for playground shenanigans, but bright colors were all wrong with the bite of the October wind as the clouds, mean gray, raced overhead. I started to weave your tree, but then my father said it looked nice, and he asked if I would make one for him when I finished yours, and it would be a special gift. Ah. I took a big old hit on that lucky and tried to talk myself out of the truth. But you can't talk yourself out of what men do to us. This girl sure as shit never would. And so you didn't even want to finish the one you started for me. Finally, I got a look. Christ, I wish I hadn't. I wish she'd never looked up at me with that way with those dull, dark eyes. But she did. Faven looked right at me for the last time. She and Miriam don't come in the library anymore. It's been almost 8 months since I made that call to Colorado Human Services, and I still haven't seen those dark, bright eyes, except sometimes at night if I'm dumb enough to try to sleep sober. Suppose I ought to give up wanting to see that girl again, but I don't know if I can. God, I'm sick of this world. I'm going to do one more, because I also have another one of the Denver Noir authors who is in the audience and has been nominated. Where'd she go? There you are. Barbara Nicholas is actually a local Colorado Springs author, and she contributed a story to this collection, and she also is a finalist in the thriller category. So I hope you will all come and listen to her next week when she reads from her new novel, Dark of Night. Right? Dark of Night?
It's what?
What, Dark of Night, is that the title?
Dark.
Yeah, Dark of Night. Okay. So Barbara's story that she wrote for Denver Noir is titled Ways of Escape, and it's set in Union Station. Kind of ends in Union Station, but it's about I'm reading from a little ways into the story, and it's about a runaway who runs away from a town in eastern Colorado to make her way, hops a train to make her way to Denver to get away from her family, mostly her father. The mountains meant we were close to Denver, that frontier city turned millennial haven with the most beautiful sunsets in the world, according to my mom. I leaned out. Nothing but train in either direction. And a short way down the line, a small bright light that bobbed and weaved along the tracks. I ducked back and switched off the flashlight. She's up on top of a boxcar, by the way, and kind of under, it's got something that's holding her up there, but she's hiding up there. I ducked back and switched off the flashlight. My heart took off at a gallop that made my stomach heave. I pressed myself to the floor of the platform. Was it possible? Had someone spotted me getting on the train and called the sheriff? Could my dad have ordered the train to stop? I cried out when, from the east, there came a roar and another train shot past, an intermodal with right-of-way. Hey, called a man after the noise of the passing train subsided. I saw your light. I clenched my fists and hunkered down, squeezing my eyes shut like a child. Anyone will tell you I'm timid, like a mouse. Keep your head down, get good grades, don't do anything stupid. My refrain of survival. Beneath me, the platform shuddered as feet hit the ladder. Hey, the guy shouted again. The intermodal was now far in the distance, carrying its voice with it. The night fell silent. Then footsteps rang out on the platform. Why, hello, said the man. I unscrewed my eyes and looked up. He was a silhouette cut out of fire. I couldn't make out any detail, not his age nor the color of his clothes. He was just a man-shaped hole against the sunset. But I could smell him, grease and smoke and rusted iron. He crouched next to me and held up his light. I studied him while he looked me over. He had blonde dreads and eyes the color of topaz. He wore a pair of jeans and heavy boots and an old rain jacket. He eased back the hood. He was actually kind of cute, and maybe not much older than me. He grinned. I saw your light. I thought you'd want company. I don't, I said stiffly, relieved he wasn't my dad. Terrified as to who he might be instead, cute or not. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions. Seriously, yes.
What was the process of garnering the selections for the collection?
So to garner the submissions for Denver Noir, Akashic has the publisher has a kind of process that they go through, having done 120 of these. They definitely have their system down. And what they did when we first started talking about it was they said, we'd like you to put together a list of the authors that you think that you could get for this collection and that you think would work out for this. And they wanted a kind of a wide variety. There was going to be 14. They've played around with a few other numbers, but they've really found that 14 is their sweet spot, so that's what they hit now. And they wanted some writers who were established, people like Peter Heller, and then they wanted some writers who were emerging writers, kind of at the beginning of their career, and then they wanted some that were kind of in different spots along the path of their career. So that was one thing that they wanted, and then they wanted people. They wanted some writers who leaned a little bit more mystery or thriller, and some that leaned a little bit more literary, because the collection is it's not straight up like as you heard from the samples that I read. It's noir, but it's not like gumshoe detective. There are some gumshoe detective stories in there, but it's not all that. So it's really, as I said, sort of these dark, morally ambiguous tales. So that left a lot of room for the authors to present it as they wanted. So they wanted kind of that balance between some literary authors and some mystery thriller authors. And then they wanted people from a wide variety of backgrounds. So I had to kind of think about that and pull together a collection. And I started brainstorming with myself of sort of all the authors I knew, and then asked around among other authors and other people that I know in the literary community to try to come up with a list of who I thought would be great for this. And then I put that together for Akashic with some information about all of the authors, and I sent them that proposal, and they were very happy with it, and they said, yeah, that looks great, let's go for it. And so that's when I signed a contract, and then I had to reach out to all those authors and ask them if they would do it. And I'm happy to I had 13 of them because I was writing a story too. So out of those 13, 11 said yes, and the 2 that didn't, it was only because they had time constraints and they couldn't do it. But we were able to get going at that point. That was like fall 2020 when we started, and then we had the entire collection together and to the publisher by, I think it was June of 2021, and then the book came out about a year later.
So were there newly created pieces, or did they pull from what they had already?
They had to be new and original pieces, so that was one of the requirements as well. Yeah, that was also a requirement, that these all had to be the first time that these were published anywhere. At this point, all the authors had, once the book was published, the rights to the stories have reverted back to the authors, so they can go on and publish them in other places if they want to. In fact, Alan Brooks, who I showed you the graphic story, has put together a new collection of some of his work, and he's included his story from Denver Noir in there. And they can submit them other places or put them in their short story collections, but they did have to be original for this to start with. Yeah.
I'd love to know what other locations are in the collection.
I can tell you. I'll tell you. I'll give you a list of rundown. So, and I can tell you who's in it. So the first story is set in Aurora, and it's by David Heska Blue Wyden, if you know who he is. He wrote Winter Counts. He's amazing. The second story is set on Cap Hill, and it's by Twana Latrice Hill. The third story is mine, set in Cheeseman Park. And the fourth story is by Erica T. Worth, who just had an amazing novel come out last fall called White Horse, and that one is set in Lakewood. The next one is Peter Heller's story, set in Sloan's Lake. And then Alan Brooks' story, the graphic story, and that's set in Baker. And then Amy Drayer's that I read from, which is set in South Broadway. Mark Stevens contributed a story, if you know him. He's been around for a long time too, and I believe he's been a Colorado Book Award winner. His story is set in Glendale. Manuel Ramos, his story is set on the north side. He also has been around for a long time and writes amazing noir. Barbara Nicholas, who I also read from, and whose story is set in Union Station. Dio Cordero, who has a story set in Auraria. Francilia Belton wrote a story set in 5 Points, and that one is historic. It's set in kind of the 1950s jazz age, and it's really a lot of fun. Mathangi Subramanian wrote a story set in Wash Park. And finally, Mario Acevedo wrote a story that's set in Globeville. Yep. Any other questions?
I have a question. So the book is divided into sections.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come up with, or what made you decide to do it that way?
Yeah, so the book has 3 sections, and that's another thing that Akashic asks for, is that it's kind of in parts. So so we have 3 parts. And so once I had those 14 stories, and I was kind of looking for themes that I could put together to kind of have parts of the book. And so the first part is called The Longest Wickedest Street, which is Colfax, if you know Denver. And that one included the story by Dave that's set in Aurora, and the Cap Hill story, and the Cheeston Park, and also the Lakewood. The next part was 5280, and that I was kind of collecting stories that that sort of either followed that theme of being high in one way or another. And that was Peter Heller's story, Alan Brooks, Amy Drayer, Mark Stevens, and Manuel Ramos. And then the third part was called Things to Do in Denver When You're Young. Because it was interesting to me that so many of the stories had young protagonists and narrators, and it really made it an interesting way to draw that collection together. So one was Barbara's story, and then Dio Cordero's, Francilia Belton's, Mathangi Subramanian's, and Mario Acevedo's. All of those stories have feature a protagonist who is on the younger side. So, yeah, that was kind of fun to come up with those themes and those titles for the parts of the collection. And then once I submitted the manuscript, we did a little bit of playing around with the order of things with the publisher and with the editor, with the big editor. I was the little editor, but then there's an editor in chief at Akashic, and that's who I worked with. His name is Johnny Temple, to kind of come up with what the way that we felt the collection would read. Thank you, everyone.
And if anyone has further questions for any of the authors today, there will be time to ask them individually, and you can ask them to sign your books too. So, okay, so our next author is literary fiction finalist Sean Eads, author of Confessions. Sean has published 3 novels and a short story collection, and has been a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award, Lambda Literary Award, and the Colorado Book Award. His stories have appeared in numerous anthologies, and he lives in Westminster.
Thanks. I have been a finalist for some awards, and hopefully this is the year that the baby finally gets his bottle. That would be really, really nice. If you're looking for a book with very older characters and not new ones, my book is perfect for you, because I tend to write older people. I got my AARP card in the mail actually the other day, and I realized, thank God, my body has finally caught up with my soul. It seems like that's all that I can do is write old people. Confessions is a story set in a small eastern Kentucky town, not unlike the towns that I would spend my summers in growing up, because I'm from Kentucky myself. The town is called Wince Hollow, and it involves 3 characters. You're experiencing the life in this town through 3 characters. One is a fellow named Nathan Ashcraft, who grew up in the town and then ran away from home right as soon as he graduated high school. His life was ruined by his high school biology teacher, inadvertently. The second character, Sarah Lawrence, is that high school biology teacher who's now pushing 80 and retired, but she's kind of looking back on her life and reflecting on what she sees as her successes. And as she goes along, dark realizations start to creep into her thoughts that maybe she hasn't been quite as successful and nice as she thought she was. The third character is a younger 30s gay dentist transplant from Seattle who's only practicing in Kentucky to participate in a federal. If you do dentistry in Kentucky, you can be in a dental loan repayment thing to get your dental school loans relieved. So he's looking for love, and unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be another gay guy within 300 miles of him in this area. So as the course of the novel goes, he starts giving bisexuality a try. But basically, the novel plays into a sense of self-identity, more importantly, your sense of self-worth. How do you find that? And if you have found it, how do you keep it? The novel opens with the death of a baby, and a stillborn baby. And this leads these three characters to realize that their lives have intersected with each other in ways that they just never comprehended. And that sparks all the events that happens in the story. The chapter that I'm going to read is from the exact middle of the novel. It's from Nathan's point of view. Nathan is the funeral director. Just to set up the scene a little bit, in the previous chapter, he has been asked to go to a hospital to pick up a body from a morgue. And when he arrives, he's stunned to find that the body is Sarah, the biology teacher. He takes her back to the funeral home. He's kind of reminiscing about a lot of unwanted feelings that he just has not processed in all this time. But he gets interrupted by when a man shows up who says that he is Sarah's husband, and he has a manuscript to give to Nathan. So I'm going to take it from there. I didn't realize the process could go so fast, Mrs. Lawrence's husband said as I led him into my office. I didn't look down at the large envelope he had given me, but my fingers kept squeezing it. There seemed to be about an inch of paper inside. Sarah would like that, he said. She never had much patience. Even when it came to our marriage, she just wanted to go to the courthouse. No ceremony, no waiting. I gestured to a chair. Oh, thank you very much, he continued, sitting down. The man spoke in a casual but very fast tone, which told me his thoughts were chaotic and lost, as they had every right to be. If you'll give me just a minute, I'd like to find your wife's file. I'd started to say paperwork. Yes, of course, he said. He crossed one leg over his knee and held it there. His dangling foot wagged back and forth like a puppy dog's tail. I went to the cabinet and pulled out the drawer with the letter L. Robbie, my predecessor, had been old-fashioned when it came to filing clients, cataloging couples together under their husband's name only. What is your first name again, please? I'm sorry, I've forgotten it. No worries at all, he said. It's Frank. Thank you. I found the file. I retrieved it and brought it to the desk. The paperwork inside showed the arrangements, the burial plots, the tombstones. Everything seems to be paid for except the coffins, I said. I'm sorry, he countered. That's the wrong file. It has both of your names listed right here. I realize that. You'll have to excuse me. It's been such a terrible day. I completely know, he said. Please don't say you understand. Maybe you will later. Maybe I will too. There should be a second file with just her name on it. If you'll please look, I would appreciate it. Swallowing, I went back to the cabinet, and sure enough, he was correct. The second folder looked to be far newer than the original, which might have been 30 years old. I held it up and pivoted back to him. He held out his hand, and I gave him the folder. He opened it, read, and nodded. Exactly as she said. I'm not following. Trust me, I'm barely keeping up with her myself, he said. Some of the answers are in there, he said, pointing to the stack of papers he had given me. I sat down at my desk, considered the manuscript envelope, and pushed it aside. Mr. Lawrence reached forward and pushed it back, front and center on my desk. I blinked at him. What is this? I asked. My wife's confession, though she'd certainly never used that term. She printed it off this morning. 2 copies, one for you, one for me. I'm not sure when she began working on it. It seems she deleted the file. This morning? Yes. I shook my head. But she was in the hospital. How did... It seems she planned it all out. She phoned me to come home, saying it was urgent. By the time I got there, it was too late. Much too late. He rubbed at his quivering lower lip. I sat back with the feeling of two hands pushing hard into my chest. She killed herself? I thought you knew that already. No, I'm sorry. I haven't even looked at your wife's body or reviewed the hospital's notes. Not knowing what else to do and wanting to avoid eye contact with him, I turned to my computer and began typing. It was a pathetic attempt to make it seem like I had a course of action. Mrs. Lawrence committing suicide? There were several times when I'd wished she had done just that, but the idea of it happening was like imagining the Great Wall of China crumbling. Do you have certain software? Mr. Lawrence's question startled me. My screen was, in fact, dark, and for a horrified second I thought he had seen it, but he couldn't possibly from his angle. I'm sorry? I'm always curious about industry-specific software. I know the question must sound very strange. I apologize. I just need something to ground me. Pathetic as it may seem, software and spreadsheets do that. No, don't apologize. There is a software platform for funeral directors. Several, actually. I like one called Osiris. What do you like about it? It helps manage every detail. He accepted my generic answer with a grunt and looked down at his lap. Nathan, he said, I don't see any reason to avoid the subject. I know how much my wife hurt you. I don't know what you're talking about, I blurted. She was very passionate about ideas. I think she loved concepts more than people. In fact, I'm sure she did. But she did have a genuine desire to help you and many other students. She just went too far, much too far, as you'll see. I placed Mrs. Lawrence's file atop the manuscript envelope, opened it, and surveyed her order. Looks like she wants cremation. Mr. Lawrence mumbled something. He was almost hugging himself. I glanced at the older file, still open to the details of the mutual burial plans of a husband and wife. She didn't even want to rest beside me, he said. I didn't know anything about these other plans until I sat down and read what she had left behind. Have you ever seen a wife make separate funeral plans from her husband in secret? No, I said after a moment of reflection. It's like she killed herself and then divorced me. But I'll honor her wishes. She just makes it sound like I bullied her into a traditional funeral. What? It's in your copy of the manuscript. Maybe one day I'll read it. You must, he said, leaning forward. Please. I scanned her file again. She didn't want a memorial service, it seems. You and I might be the only people to come, he said. Maybe we're having that memorial service right now. It's the funeral director's job to attend the service. That doesn't make me a mourner. My own words shocked me. Never mind the affront to professionalism. I had never said something so vicious to another person under any circumstance, much less a fresh widower. I'm sorry, I said. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to bear a grudge. I'm trying hard not to hold one against her right now, but I think I would if I were in your shoes. We held each other's stare. I didn't remember every time I'd stopped by Mrs. Lawrence's classroom to talk, but a few instances remained vivid. Had she ever mentioned a husband? Had she ever mentioned anything like a private life? Did it even cross my mind to ask repayment for all the time she had listened to my problems and took my loneliness seriously? It was impossible to recapture whatever assumptions I had about her back then, though it embarrasses me now to think that I could have been so self-absorbed. I don't know what I feel anymore, I said. It all happened a long time ago. I moved on. Sarah would be glad about that. I wish this meeting between us could have taken place about 30 years earlier. I'm not sure I understand. I would have helped you, he said. I would have kept Sarah from going to your parents. I ask you to believe that I didn't even know this happened. She was already on thin ice with the school board. Your parents could have gotten her fired easily. My mom didn't want anyone to know. The shame she felt for me kept Mrs. Lawrence safe. I know Sarah felt awful. If she felt awful, she could have quit. Quitting wasn't in her nature. Then she could have apologized at least. Nathan, I think she did. Not to me. He gestured again to the big envelope. I think it's in there. Maybe you can accept it or maybe you can't, but there's no harm in looking. Mr. Lawrence rose and extended his hand. I shook it by reflex. I'll arrange for the cremation. I don't have facilities to do it here. I looked down at the paperwork one more time. She didn't select any sort of urn or mausoleum, not even a memorial plaque. What do you want to do with the ashes? I don't want them. That's fine, I said, but you understand they have to be disposed of according to state law. There is a designated spot in the town cemetery for scattering ashes, if you'd prefer that. Honestly, a decision doesn't have to be made today, Mr. Lawrence. Would you like some time to consider? He bit down a little on his bottom lip and nodded. Then I showed him to the door. There didn't seem to be anything left to say, but he surprised me on the porch with one cryptic, out-of-the-blue remark. I really didn't want to be a father. The words and the hoarseness of his voice, like he was coughing smoke from his lungs, caught me so off guard that all I could do was nod. We shook hands a final time, and he went to his car. All right. Thanks. So, questions, Q&A, what's up? None?
Well, just that it was a lot of fun. You had us laughing and you had us in forward.
Oh, good. Thank you. You know, it's funny. I'm probably more known as a horror sci-fi. If you look at my stuff, like what gets published is horror and science fiction largely. And that's just because I get contracted to write that stuff, and I do enjoy writing it. But when it comes to what I read, it's closer to like Barbara Kingsolver and Marilyn Robinson. So this is actually a chance finally to write and get something published that's closer to what I do actually prefer to read myself. Yeah.
Did you do research at a mortuary?
Oh my gosh, the deep dive for that is insane. So many videos on, like what is a funeral home? Because I was like, does the funeral home director actually prepare the bodies? How do they prepare the body? What do they do? How? And he's working by himself. And one of the minor plot points is that his assistant quit. So it's like, well, when you go and you're trying to get a body out of the hearse and get it onto whatever, like, how do you do that? The body's a big thing to lift. And so getting into the YouTube videos on the sheer number of different devices and pulleys and levers that a person has to maneuver a body to one place to another and all that, that's the type of stuff. And also, just you get into something, you're like, how does a hearse actually work? You wouldn't believe that there's so many different sliding tables, in the interior of a hearse, and I don't ever want to see one, other than on a Google video. But so it's like, all right, you do make those notes, yeah. Otherwise, it wasn't super research intensive.
Okay, so we do have one final author today, and that is Nancy Reddy. She co-edited the anthology titled The Long Devotion, Poets Writing Motherhood, with Emily Pérez. Nancy is an associate professor of writing and first-year studies at Stockton University. She is also the author of Pocket Universe, Double Jinx, which was a 2014 winner of the National Poetry Series, and the chapbook Acadiana.
Hi, so thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all in Colorado tonight. Our book is The Long Devotion. My co-editor, Emily Pérez, is a Coloradan. She lives in Denver, and she was really sorry to not be able to be here tonight. So I'm really happy to be able to spend this time with you from my house in New Jersey. So our anthology, The Long Devotion, Poets Writing Motherhood, we were aiming to really capture a really wide variety of experiences of motherhood. And so we wanted everything from the stress of having a little tiny baby to ambivalence about, becoming a parent at all, and to include a lot of the really hard stuff like stillbirth and miscarriage and abortion, alongside a lot of the real joy, and especially kind of the joy across the span of parenting. And I thought that I would share tonight a couple of poems, just 3 poems that show some of that span in terms of age. Here in New Jersey, my kids still have a couple weeks of school. I think probably in Colorado they might be done or close to it. So I've been thinking a lot about those kinds of transitional moments. And one other thing I wanted to share about the book, I think because for Emily and I, writing was such an important part of like thinking about our transition into parenthood and making sense of those challenges and joys. We also wanted to include essays and writing prompts alongside the poems. And so the idea is that the book is also an invitation to take up writing. I will start with a poem by the wonderful Colorado writer, Camille T. Dungy. It has a very long title, so just like hold on for a minute. Know that the title is almost as long as the poem. And this is about the kind of stresses of traveling with a small child. This is the title. The average mother now spends twice as many hours on childcare as did her counterpart in 1965. And she also spends 3 times as many hours working outside the home, or how to sing a song of sixpence when you're really feeling wry. We flew through a thunderstorm on our way into Pittsburgh, landing without incident, but a hailstorm descended, delaying our bags. 40 minutes, 1 hour. When we got into the town car, both the driver and his wife's well-timed pot roast were burning. When he started driving, the baby started screaming. She wouldn't stop screaming. The label peeking from below the driver's cap left a red mark on his scalp. We were the worst people he had ever known. Pittsburgh, late April, cold as we drove past industrial parks outside the city, cold as the setting sun burnished mirrored buildings bronze. She wouldn't stop crying. I leaned over her car seat, said, "Every person in this car is upset right now, but you are the only one screaming." We drove out of some sort of tunnel, everyone quiet now, smiling, over the yellow bridges into Pittsburgh. If anyone's ever, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and if anyone's ever flown into Pittsburgh, you might know that bridge. You come in this really beautiful view of the city through a tunnel and then across the rivers. The next poem I'll read is by the poet Catherine Pierce, and it's in her book, Danger Days, which is a lot about parenting through climate change and the challenges of raising kids now. The book is titled High Dangerous, and it's, well, you'll hear what it is. You'll hear why it's called that. High Dangerous is what my sons call the flowers, purple, white, electric blue, pom-pomming bushes all along the beach town streets. I can't correct them into hydrangeas, or I won't. Bees ricochet in and out of the clustered petals, and my sons panic and dash, and I tell them about good insects, pollination. But the truth is, I want their fear box full of bees. This morning, the radio said, tender age shelters. This morning, the glaciers are retreating. How long now until the space print backpack becomes district policy clear? We're almost to the beach, and high dangerous, my sons yell again, their joy in having spotted something beautiful and called it what it is. So I'll close with one poem. It's called The Whole Point, and it's by the poet Lina Khalaf Tuffaha. And it's one of the, so our poem, I was really interested in what Cynthia had to say about the sections in the Denver Anthology and the way that that kind of shapes a reader's understanding of the book. Our anthology has 4 sections, and the final one is titled Transitions, and it's about lots of transitions, not just, transitions as your child ages, but this is the poem that that opens that final section. The Whole Point. My first time, like a fool, I insisted, no epidural for me. I shook so violently, I thought I would die right then. No poems published yet. So much left unsaid. Turns out we are stronger and more stubborn than we imagine. I told the story many times. Girlfriends and aunties love testimony from the front lines. But you are almost 13 now, and the memories recede. When I first glimpsed you, dark eyes wide open, I knew something between us had ended. The quiet companionship, the cocoon we both lived in, cast aside. Later, with your sisters, you prepared me for this loss. I knew to lean into the quiet and listen, to learn their language before they could speak it, before the exit from wordless music into out loud song. A million farewells follow this day, the guilt heavy wanting to leave you for the first time, craving back some of the space you have taken, trying to assemble the puzzle of self after you, sharing your heart with friends, your adoration with teachers. At school, the principal tells us, we really value independence. We want to teach them how to leave the nest. The whole point is to prepare them to go out into the world. We have been. From the moment you arrived in our arms, kissing you, giving you pieces of ourselves, amulets from our journey, and kissing you goodbye. So I'll pause there, or I'll stop there. And if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about kind of the assembling of an anthology, I would love to talk to you all.
My question is about your selection process or putting together this anthology. How did you choose the authors and how did you put together the book?
Yeah, I was listening to your answer to that because I think we had pretty different, a different process in that we did not have an editor or a press. We had like an idea, like we want this book to exist, and then we had to figure out how to do that. So we wrote a proposal. We have a university press, the University of Georgia Press, that we eventually got signed on. But it was this really interesting early process of, as you were saying, trying to reach out to people who we really loved, people who we thought we could get, trying to think like, who are the writers that if we can get these people on board, other people will be like, oh, this is exciting. I want to join that project too. And so we started by reaching out to a couple of writers that we really loved, people we knew like had some sort of personal connection to start with. Emily knows both Camille Dungy and Carmen Jimenez Smith, and they agreed to write the foreword and the afterword. And so that I think was kind of important in terms of getting like, real people on board with the project. And from there, it was kind of this like long process. I think of it as kind of like expanding the circle of who and what we thought the book could include. We started with the people that we already knew and some of the topics that we knew we wanted to cover. And then kept coming across things as we kept reading or as people were suggesting things to us in terms of experiences and identities that maybe we hadn't considered. At a couple of points, we're like, oh, wait, but we haven't, like it was really important to me that step parenting be represented in the book. And that was something that was actually kind of hard to find. And other kinds of experiences. So it's kind of like, what have we not included? What have we not included? How do we make sure that we're making this kind of as big and diverse as we can? I think we have something like 65 contributors. So it's a big, it's not like a big book to look at it, to read it, but just because they're poems, we had a lot of them, which was really exciting, but was also just like a lot to manage kind of like practically.
So did you get the submissions and then make the 4 categories, or did you kind of have that as your idea and then?
That's a good question. We must have, the submissions were in our sections were in the proposal. I think we probably had sections or we had ideas, and then the book evolved and we changed them a little bit and then we went back. Does that make sense? I feel like that always happens with a book, right? You think you have the shape of it and then you work on it and it like wiggles a little bit. But by the time we had the proposal to send out to presses, we probably had like 75% of the contributors kind of locked in, and we must have had the shape at that point. I think we must have said, like, these are the 4 sections. This is why the book is organized the way that this is. This is how we, kind of see the book taking shape.
One more question. Yeah. What was your process like working collaboratively with somebody? You said you're in New Jersey and Emily is here. So
yeah.
Support long distance like that.
I mean, it's been the most wonderful partnership. And Emily and I didn't know each other very well before we started working together. We had co-chaired an AWP panel together, and kind of decided to keep going from there. And so I don't know, it's a relationship that's really important to me. Like, our friendship, our professional collaboration, really grew out of working on this book together. I think there were times when I was talking to her as much as anyone in my household or family, especially in the pandemic. We had a lot of phone calls, a lot of Zoom, et cetera. I think we're very lucky, and we couldn't have, I don't think, anticipated this. We weren't super strategic about our partnership, but we're very lucky that we have kind of complementary skill sets in some ways. I'm pretty organized, but Emily is exceptionally detail oriented. And so she's really good at being on top of things. And I think it also enabled us to kind of come in and out of the project. There were times where I was like, oh, wow, I am overwhelmed. I can't work on this right now. And she would kind of tag in. And there were times where I could tag in with other parts of it. And that's been really helpful. We wrote an essay for, I think it's online. We wrote an essay for Cincinnati Review, in part about the kind of collaborative editing process. There are parts of the book, we have little, introductions and things that we worked on so much together, that I don't think I could tell you now, which words were hers and which words were mine. And that's a really special kind of relationship that I haven't had otherwise in my writing life. And it's something that I've missed a lot. Now that the book is done, I'm like, oh man, it was so nice to have a buddy, to have someone else, because when you're working on your own book, you kind of have to believe in it on your own for a lot of the project, right? So to have this other person be like, no, this is good. We're going to make it. It's good. That was an incredible part of that friendship and relationship.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, folks, I just want to say a few more thank yous before we wrap up. Thank you to Library 21C for hosting the reading, and to everybody that made the Colorado Book Awards possible: entrants, selectors, judges, volunteers, Colorado Humanities staff. We hope that you'll join us at the beautiful and historic Penrose House, which is here in Colorado Springs, on Saturday, June 10th, for the Colorado Book Awards finalist celebration and winners announcement. You can secure your ticket at our website, which is coloradohumanities.org. There are only a small amount of tickets left, so if you haven't purchased tickets yet, I encourage you to do so soon. And thank you all for coming out to support Colorado writers today. We look forward to seeing you at the reading next Saturday and at the celebration. Don't forget to stop by the Poor Richard's Books and Gifts table to purchase your books and get them signed and get home safely. Thank you.